We are now 2 people live on
Amen.
LinkedIn and excited for this conversation on workplace mental health. Yes, we are real live humans, and I'm a tech founder, but not necessarily a LinkedIn tech founder.
Neither am I. I am very, very, very human. So human that, especially when talking about mental wellness, we started off with giving ourselves grace and also just trusting that what is meant to be will be. So we know that this will happen. We know that my animal who just was napping all morning and just decided to wake up right now before it's time for us to go live is in the building. So you may hear a little bit of Puma in the background. But listen, we practice what we preach. So when we center well-being, we center our humanity. We center the right for all the things to happen, and also center what we know to be true. That is, everything is in absolute divine right order. So today will be beautiful. Today will be an opportunity just to co-create something magnetic, right? So even though we can't see y'all, we do feel your energy. And thank you. Thank you to those of you who chose to spend this time with us. Just imagine that, as creative human beings, we get to carve out moments in the world where we get to focus energy and attention on things. And today that happens to be well-being in the workplace. What does it mean to be a leader who is creating an organizational culture of health so that when you walk into that place, when your teams walk into that place, everybody knows that my wellness, my full well-being, my full humanity is welcomed, is respected, and is honored here. So thank you for choosing to spend this time with us. We are recording, so we will be able to repost and reshare some of these things just in case you're joining us a little bit late or tech gets funny. So we're trying to cover all angles, but we want to get started by introducing ourselves. So Colette, do you want to go first with an introduction and then I'll come back?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So welcome again, everyone. Hi, my name is Colette Ellis. I am the founder of Libbie Health. I am streaming to you live from Brooklyn, New York. I am a native New Yorker. I don't know why I felt the need to say that today, but I did. Born and raised in the Bronx and live in Brooklyn. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. By way of background, I am a behavioral health coach. I'm also trained in a healing method, an evidence-based healing method called emotional freedom technique, EFT or tapping, which we may get to share a little bit about that today. And that healing method is at the foundation of our innovation, Libbie, which is an AI-powered mental wellness companion, which guides users through thematic healing practices like tapping, like breathing, in order to support our mental well-being. And so I'm really passionate about this topic, and I'm really glad to be here with you all today.
One thing that I do know is that when you're from Brooklyn, you always declare Brooklyn. So that's why. I'm Brooklyn. I might be cheating on Brooklyn a little bit by living in Queens currently, but always repping Brooklyn, New York, East New York, Brooklyn, that is. I am Dr. Zuleika Ruglo Clinton Henderson. Not only am I repping Brooklyn, but I'm also repping Ruglo, which is a combination of my grandmother's names. So I honor and acknowledge them as a part of this experience. I know that I am here because of their dreams, their visions, everything that they have sowed. And I am also representing what I believe is my purpose as a part of living. Ever since I was a little girl, I felt that there was a story inside of me about healing and about Black healing and intergenerational Black healing and well-being in particular. And so most recently that has evolved to this vision, which Puma, the cat, co-signs, which is the development of the Center for Black Wellbeing. And what we are is a community engagement and wellness consulting firm. For our community engagement piece, what we do is we co-curate spaces with Black folks where we get to be in community and get curious and excited and explore healing and wellness together in ways that center creativity and play. And we're also, in terms of wellness consulting, it's our commitment to make sure that there are spaces in this world where, as Black folks, not only do we get to lead, but we also get to be members of those communities and in those communities, it is our hope that they will have the tools and the systems of accountability to make sure that they are environments where our well-being is not only respected, but effectively and equitably supported. And so we do all of this in the name of holding our end of, our part of this rate, our part of this life, a baton that has been passed by our ancestors to support intergenerational Black well-being. And so that is who we are and why we're here, contributing to this conversation on leading through a lens of wellness and mental health.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I wanted to say I'm wearing our Libbie Health Liberation t-shirt as part of this conversation and as part of this journey. And I'm right there with you in terms of what are the ways that we can have better representation in wellness, in well-being from a practitioner side, as well as acknowledging all of the historic, ancestral, and indigenous forms of healing when we are talking about centering our well-being. So I wanted to share a little bit about why we're doing this. I mean, I think we've sort of really gotten there in terms of our introductions, and I'm hoping that folks can see the synergies between our two organizations. But I'm a bit of a people nerd, and I love data. So I'm presuming that if you're watching this, I know that I'm probably preaching to the choir a little bit already. But in case you weren't aware of, there are just a few data points that I wanted to highlight in terms of why it's important to have this conversation. So American Psychological Association in their 2023 Work in America study, so 92% of employees want to work for organizations that value emotional well-being and provide support for their mental health. And 94% of employees want to feel a sense of belonging at work. So probably no shockers there. But you might be surprised to know that 23% of Black, 22% of Latinx employees don't feel like they belong in their organizations. And 39% of Black, 34% of Latinx, and 38% of LGBTQ plus IA employees don't feel supported by their employers. And so, yesterday was World Mental Health Day. Today is National Coming Out Day. And these observances, right, are kind of one moment in time where we know that all of these things that we talk about are 365 because we live 365. But Dr. Zlick and I wanted to have this conversation around how is it that leaders of organizations, be you, startup founders like me or C-suite leaders within, small to mid-size or even enterprise organizations, what is it that you can do for yourself to walk the talk around your own mental health and well-being? Because we do know that it starts from within, and then being able to think about what does that look like in terms of supporting your employees within that organization. I wanted to kick it off with that first question. What do we even mean by workplace mental health? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so typically when we're thinking about mental health, we are considering how people are feeling, right? What's the state of the health of their mind, right? So how's your mind? And also thinking about how our social engagements contribute to that, how our just experience in these bodies, in this world affect how we're thinking, what we're thinking, how we're feeling every day. And so when we think about those things in the context of the workplace setting, we want to be asking questions like, how do people feel in this environment? How does the implicit and explicit policies and practices, how do those affect whether or not people actually feel like they have a chance to feel well, to be well here? How does it shape, what's going on in my psyche, how I'm thinking about things? And also just thinking about kind of the layers of things, right? So often when thinking about workplace mental health, people start considering, how do the health benefits and resources that we offer here support folks with doing things to address their emotional and psychological well-being. But for us, it's really more expansive than that, than just what your healthcare resources are. One, you really want to think about how to empower positionality. How do the demands, how does the energy, the vibe of this environment actually support people with feeling like my wellness is a thing that matters here, right? How does it support people with feeling like, yes, I'm aware that these resources exist, but even thinking that I can use these resources, right? Are there differences? Often I talk about healing equity, which means that, yes, the resources might be available, but does everybody have an equitable opportunity to access them? Or do the demands of my role make it so that I can't use the extra money that you give us to get massages once a month, right? So really thinking about workplace mental health kind of looks at those layers of things. How do the goals of our organization, how are the things that we are here to do on a daily basis, how do those support or how do those threaten our emotional and psychological well-being? So workplace mental health often gets reduced to, like, what are we doing for the people who work here? What kind of workshop can we add on for one day? But really, it is a more thorough examination and analysis of structural factors and forces and how those come to play. How do those things that exist within the DNA of an organization, within the history of an organization, set the tone for whether or not wellness is prioritized here? And things that we'll get to talk about later is that workplace mental health really invites everybody who's a part of that community to think critically about, who am I being here? And especially in my leadership role, are the things that I am supporting, are the things that I am talking, the things that I'm saying out of my mouth, do those reinforce or set the tone or set the stage for everybody who is a part of this community, knowing that I can consider how I'm feeling, I can consider the state of my mind, I can talk about how the demands here are kind of affecting whether or not I feel like I can center and be well. So workplace mental health is, for us at the intersection of all of those things, but it's often treated as if it's just one thing, like what kinds of activities can we add to our agenda, but not what's the integration, like how do we see workplace practices and activities and wellness as inextricably connected.
That's really great. And I was thinking, as I was thinking about this definition as well, around what you just mentioned around intersectionality, right? And there's a lot of talk around, bringing your whole self to work, right? But again, for all of the things that you mentioned, if the system, structures, culture, environment, vibe, all of that isn't aligning, right, then it is difficult to bring your whole self to work, in quotes. And I don't even really know what that means anyway. I think, and what I've seen recently, so there are two things that I wanted to mention there. One, when you were talking, it reminded me of once I was doing a stress management session with an organization, and the leader of that organization was sitting in the session. And we were talking, the employees, I was asking, all the things about definitions of stress and stress triggers, sort of all the data, the things that you do, I'm sure, in your programs as well. But then the conversation started to shift from that perspective of, again, not just what's happening outside that's impacting their work, but how their work structure and the demands of the work was also impacting their mental health. And it was literally an aha moment for the leader in the organization to be like, wow, I just hadn't thought of it that way. So again, and it seems self-explanatory, but sometimes it's not, right? Because we are thinking about it, as you were saying, in those terms of check the box. Okay, we've done our stress management, we've done our things, and not always looking at what are the sort of internal structures. And then the other piece, which you talked about eloquently also, was around this sense of intersectionality, right? That we are a combination of all of our roles and our identities. And for me personally, this has become real as I became a caregiver in the last year and a half. And so adding that to my roles and my identity has changed my mental health, which then changes, right, how I show up in my organization. So literally walking the talk is me walking the talk of this, right? me even thinking differently about what this means, as I'm, building an organization and thinking about that as well.
Yeah, agree. I feel like often in the work that we end up doing with organizations, so much of it comes back to examining kind of what are my worldviews about wellness and work, and confronting the fact that I've been living a story that in the place where I am performing a service or serving a role, and sometimes that's work and sometimes that's home and sometimes that's, other settings where we are, but sometimes we've internalized this idea that when I am in action around something that I've committed to do in the name of work, I don't get to be well, that I have to prioritize whatever my commitments are, because other people are watching, or because, I need to keep this job and make this money. So at all costs, I will do whatever it is that is connected to my workplace expectations. And so much of workplace mental health is around pausing to be able to identify what is the occurring world that I have around my wellness. And many times, again, when in leadership roles, we think that we are ending up trying to create space to do this for the people that, we lead. But real leading from a place of wellness means that I'm pausing out and I'm inviting myself to ask myself those questions too. How do I think about well-being? How do I think about that? Where did those ideas come from? Right? And so not only are there our cultural values in terms of maybe whatever communities that we've been a part of and the values that we've learned and what we've observed, but we also exist inside of a nation and a world where work and the ideas around work and labor have also been, that messaging is deep. And so much of it is about outcomes and performance. So when I come to this conversation about mental health in the workplace, it almost causes me to reorganize, what happens organically in my mind, which sometimes is to think of those things as polarized, that I only get to focus on wellness when I'm focusing on wellness. And that happens to be when maybe my vacation time or my sick time got approved, or that I only get to focus on wellness after, whatever time I check out of the clock. And so as we think about leadership strategies, I think one of the big ones is to say, before I get to trying to walk a talk, let me figure out, well, what have I been talking? What have I been saying about wellness here? And not just out of my mouth, but in the policies that I uphold and the things that I sign off on or I don't sign off on, right? What have I been living about wellness? What have people been able to experience about wellness through my leadership here already? And just sitting with that, examining the origins of that. What have I discovered? What has been modeled for me? What have I been modeling here? And that is a way different entry point than trying to figure out, hey, what's the, popular event that I can offer to the people who work here to do? That is a different conversation. And so, I feel like sometimes, being able to do this work well requires holding space for people to interrogate that, and then to give ourselves permission to know that I can center my well-being wherever I am, because the fullness of this body and this mind and whatever is happening in it shows up in each setting that I'm at. And so if I don't care for my heart, if I don't care for my mind, if I don't consider how the things that I'm asked to do or the things that I'm doing through my leadership either align with and support and enhance wellness, if I don't consider how those things threaten that, then I'd be maybe missing some critical things about how to actually be fully present here as a whole and healthy and well human being, and then to lead from that perspective. So I think it's really, really layered. So even if we paused for a second, I know we don't see y'all, but maybe this gets to be interactive. Just take a minute or two. Where did my ideas around well-being come from? What did I see? What is my wellness philosophy? And if I had to do a scavenger hunt around my leadership practices, what would I find that would be a demonstration of what I believe about the right to be well, not only for me, but for the people that I lead? What would I discover?
Yes, I wanted to give everyone the power of the pause there. I think for me personally, I think, as a Black woman, what did I learn about wellness? And particularly, right, for some reason it comes up around holiday times, and I was having a conversation with my mother, I think it was sometime last year, and she was talking about, a holiday dinner that she was making for the family, including extended family, and not being well, but kind of just doing it anyway, right? And I wouldn't have even known right when it was, because even as her daughter, I didn't know that she wasn't well. So that how I learned about putting family first or putting others first, perhaps sometimes forsaking my health and well-being, right? And that's not a slight. That's just, that's part of our culture. I mean, if we go back, right, historical and ancestral, like that's, we know that why that's the case. But then coming to that, right, and sort of thinking about, well, what does that mean? And for me, again, stepping into this role of caregiver, I see that coming up where I do that. I still do that, right? Because now that in some cases, when the roles are reversed, I do make sure that she's okay. Or last year for my dad, making sure that he was okay before maybe how I felt. And it has been very personal for me to maintain my wellness practices. I didn't think that this was going to be a dialogue about my mom, but my mom actually knows that I meditate. So when I would be, living there during the time last year, she would know that that was the thing that I first did in the morning. And I don't even really know how she realized that. Hey, Puma. So when I always talk with clients about whether that's personal or professional boundaries, whenever you make a change in your own personal wellness or well-being or healing practices, the question that I often ask is, who will need to know, right? Or when you make this change for yourself, who might be initially impacted by that change? And it's, again, not to have people decide not to do it. It's just a matter of then how will you communicate about this change with the people in your world that need to know about it. So, personally, that means if you're living with someone in a space and you're going to decide to do whatever the healing practice is, who needs to know? Because maybe that means that you're not available during the time that they may have otherwise expected you to be available. And you can say the same thing in the workplace, right? And that's always the harder conversation, right? Because people think like, can I tell my manager that I'm doing X, Y, or Z, that I'm taking this time out for meditation? Or if you are the manager, right, how do you create time and space? And how do you model those help-seeking healing behaviors so that your team, your colleagues, your organization, they know that this is okay, right? It's like literally, again, coming back to, so you talked about the talk, and then it is once you've had that self-exploration, you've been that emotional detective, and you've maybe identified the things that you might want to adjust or take on, then right, how is it that you communicate it with others? And then how do you create that space for others then to be able to take on their own practices when it's right for them, right? Because the other thing is, okay, now that I've become a meditator, like everybody should meditate, right? Like we can sort of go into that mode, right? The first thing when you first like, this is amazing, everybody needs to know, right? I want to tell the world about tapping, but tapping's not right for everybody, right? So again, it's like also giving people the space to identify what works for them and then the time for them to take it on themselves.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like if people are listening in for strategies, I feel like you've shared some important ones, right? What about our onboarding and orientation processes let people know that there are, that there's space for them to, bring in the practices, right? Are there things that we get to communicate there that would let folks know that, look, we want you to be your whole well self here. And we know, people do different things to do that. So are there ways in which members who join your community know that they can, that it's okay to create that space? And then I think something that really becomes a struggle is, again, thinking about the outcomes, right? And it's like, yeah, but we need to do this, that, and the third, and so we talk about workplace burnout, and we talk about, heavy demands and expectations, where we're talking purely about people's mental health, right? We know how life stressors can impact your functioning, right? So how do I consider that as a part of, sharing workplace expectations here? And when we're really trying to build sustainable strategies that consider the real things that we know about what supports people to maintain well-being, like how do we use innovation and creativity to build an organizational structure that's big enough to not only hold the ways in which our organization serves, but it holds the practices that keep our folks well enough to do those things in which that we do as our acts of service. And I think that often the, mission and the outcomes that are connected to, why those businesses exist in the first place, those often, it feels too big sometimes in our leadership roles to figure out, well, look, I got somebody else who's leading and supervising and, checking to see how we're performing here. And so I don't know how to create space. I know that everybody's wellness, it matters, but I don't really know how to create the space to do both things. And one thing that I feel like we've been supporting organizations to do is to just figure out, one, how to carve out that space, two, to remember that your commitments and your actions when it comes to workplace wellness, they don't have to be this like fast paced, super quick fixes, but really saying, hey, wellness matters here. And instead of just putting something on our website about how we care about wellness, to quickly make a statement about something, or trying to figure out how we remedy this really quickly, a part of the road to building an organizational culture that centers well-being is to maybe just say, hey, we know that wellness matters. And so we're carving out this space for us to come together and get creative about it. Start searching for spaces where we can, get time or learn how to share demands here in a different way so that we can clear up moments and opportunities for people to do things that contribute to their well-being. So yeah, the long and short of really what I want to say there is that, one, interrogate, evaluate how your current practices make space to let people know that their wellness practices, that there's space for those here. And then two, remember that even if your organization has been struggling with figuring out a solution, that dig into the bag of radically imagining things. Like just make lunchtime space for people to get together and just throw out some of the wildest ideas, and just have a practice of doing that together. And you might be surprised at what you land on as things that you can really integrate into what you do at that organization. So make space for creativity, make space for brainstorming.
That's very interesting that you mentioned that, because when you think of creativity or you think of play, right, those are very key components to well-being that I think that sometimes do get overlooked, right? The aspects of being creative. And I mean, I'm building a tech startup. This is my second business. We do have goals, objectives, clients, we do have revenue targets, all of those things still exist, right? So I think it's this duality, right, of creativity around where can we be creative around those hard metrics or hard objectives? And then also, where can we be creative around the wellness practices? And when I say be creative around it, I'm not talking about creative accounting. I'm talking about how can we be creative around how we potentially achieve those objectives, and how can we, and utilizing whether that's external feedback or asking people that aren't in certain positions to provide input, right? And again, I recognize that in smaller organizations and startups, that can sometimes be easier because you can do an all hands, and maybe, it is one screen on Zoom, but even still, how is it that we create those opportunities to get input from multiple and diverse stakeholders when we are crafting programs and initiatives, be they the wellness programs, which we're primarily talking about today, but also as we think about the deliverables that we may be offering as part of our actual organizations. I think one of the other points we were talking about, and I think we've touched upon it a lot, though, is what are these struggles with leaders, for leaders, with doing this, particularly as it relates to supporting diverse teams. And I'm thinking about the word diverse in the broadest sense, right? Again, we've talked about intersectionality, and all of us have different roles and different identities. So when we look at bringing all of this multiverse of us into one company and organization, it's like, oh, we work under this brand, right? But we're still individuals. So what else, if there are any other struggles you've seen with leaders around shaping what could this culture of well-being look like for our organization?
Yeah, I think it would kind of build on what you were just leading into. One, the idea that we have to create like one singular solution, and so often people try to like have, a talk or an initiative or an activity that does one thing, and everybody doesn't experience, define, or pursue wellness in the same way, so one, just embracing that the solution, doesn't have to just be one thing, and that that the efforts in around building the culture of workplace mental health are not asking you to come to like one final fix it. That's not it, and so sometimes thinking that you need to arrive at something that's perfect, that's going to work for everybody, is what creates a lot of pressure, and then starts getting conversation around workplace wellness being something that's mandatory, and then, there's just a lot of layers of things that get, triggered from that. So one thing is just remembering that in your leadership role, maybe there's breathing room and knowing that, you're not tasked or not asked to come up with one like perfect magic solution to this thing. That the solutions actually need to be things that have breathing room and that can grow and evolve, because your team will change. And therefore, what wellness means at that organization will change over time. So you're really trying to find strategies that will have enough flexibility to accommodate that, to account for that. So one thing is, really trying to think that you have to figure out that perfect solution is a thing that I feel like ends up creating some struggles for leaders. What about you? What have you identified or experienced working with leaders who struggle in this area?
Definitely. And one thing that I just wanted to echo when you said about flexibility, past 3 years of everything have taught us that, where you go from all in office to wherever we are now in terms of hybrid, right? Pandemic and all of the things that we've experienced, world conflicts that are happening, right? The world is ever evolving. So life is always lifing. So that aspect of the flexibility and being able also to keep your finger on the pulse of how these external forces are impacting different people within your organization in different ways. Like they say, stress is subjective. So what stresses me out may not stress you out, and vice versa. So not presuming that everyone is going to have the same reaction to everything, even if we are all experiencing the same thing at the same time does not mean that we're all going to have the same response at the same time. So I think that that's really, really critical. Other things that I've seen, I think, is also when we look at, so particularly leaders within organizations, whether they are more broadly within HR or people or culture or talent or DEI, there is also this aspect of who heals the healers. We've done self-care strategies and programs for DEI leaders and other folks. I myself also used to work in learning and development, so I was an HR leader prior to starting my other business. So there is this aspect of, if everyone's coming to you with what's going on for them, right? How are you taking care of self to be able to be at your best in order to be able to serve within the organization, within your working? So that's something I think that also can be true for leaders of organizations, whether that's executive directors or presidents or CEOs. It can be that aspect of what you were mentioning earlier, right? What does it mean if I'm the leader of the organization and I myself am needing support? Before, again, starting my own businesses, I worked for someone who, when I look back, I think, I feel like it was a toxic environment. And I think it was because the manager that I was working with was struggling with their own anger management issues. And so it felt like a combative environment every day that I went into work, or you go into work kind of like, okay, what's the mood going to be like today? And I don't know, would that person have felt comfortable taking advantage of the resources that we did have within the organization to support mental health? We had an EAP program and all of those kinds of resources, but did that person feel like that they could avail themselves of those resources? Did they feel comfortable? Were they even aware? Were they even self-aware enough also to know that whatever they may have been dealing with personally was impacting others around them in the workplace, right? So there are lots of levels there. There's, that self-awareness, which I know you resonate very closely with. Am I self-aware enough to recognize that I am stressed or something that I'm dealing with is affecting me? And then by affecting me, it's infecting and it's changing my behavior, which then affects others, right? And then after knowing that, am I ready to take the step to say, and I would like to seek help so that I can help address all of these issues, right? So it's, again, that emotional detective and then that willingness to be able to seek help in that situation.
Yeah, I love what you said. It reminds me that not only do we need space to interrogate our conceptualizations of wellness and mental health, but also our definitions of leadership. So does the definition of leadership that governs how I operate as a leader actually have some consideration for my own wellness and vulnerability? Because sometimes the identity as a leader that we have adopted aligns with some interesting ideas around strength and, demonstrating having it all together. And so making space to look into how does my leadership identity make room for me to be a leader who leads from a wellness-centered space is really important. Do I have permission? Have I given myself permission in how I've decided that I need to be a leader here to do so? And so I think that could, really be a huge part of laying the foundation for good leadership that can center wellness. Does that identity allow for that? Yeah.
Right. And with both of us as founders, right, it's like we do have that, but then even for me, like remembering that. So if I'm not well, right, I do that. I do walk my talk. Ideally, I will do that sometimes around communication, right? If I'm not in the right mind space, I will not work on either emails or even marketing messages, right? Because I do believe that our energy can go through some of those things. Not to get too woo-woo, but yeah, I think so. I will sometimes say, okay, I need to not do that because I don't want that energy flowing out of me. So having the self-awareness and then being able to say, okay, maybe this isn't the right time for this particular task, or maybe I just need to take a break, right? And need to be able to step away. The power of the pause, like we were saying earlier. But I think that comes also from, what is it, 10, 15 years now of being in the wellness space. I don't know if I had chosen a different career, it would be interesting to say, like, when would I have potentially come to those realizations, right? And so I always like that. I like to be transparent about that, right? The first stress management certification I got, I thought, oh, this is great. It's another tool in my toolbox. It's going to help organizations and clients. And it wasn't until going through the program that I realized, oh, hey, wait, I'm actually stressed out, right? And it always seems like a silly aha moment. But again, it's like going through the training that I've had in different modalities has given me that greater self-awareness to do my own emotional detective. And I will say, there have been times in my former life where I was like, nope, don't show me the mirror. I don't want to know. So I think it's that how do we, all of us, get to that point of being self-aware and knowing that it's not going to end, right? It's not like, okay, today's October 11th, like I'm done, right? This is going to continue throughout all of our journey.
Are there any examples of really powerful and impactful ways that you have observed leadership through the lens of wellness and mental health? I know you've shared some examples also in, different parts of our conversation so far, but are there any other things that may be connected to what you bring to organizations with Libbie Health and thinking about leveraging tech and digital tools? So are there examples so that people, in your experience, that, may be helpful to share?
Yes, thank you for that. I think it's funny, we and we're just now talking about technology at the end of the conversation. One of the reasons to build Libbie, our app, was around what are the ways that we can digitize some aspects of these healing practices to be able to reach more leaders, both within organizations and beyond, right? So I can lead tapping workshops. You are also working with clients I know as well. We're each one individual, right? So the power of technology can be that we can scale some aspects of our work, or at least of the work that we're doing, to be able to support employees. And this in no way replaces coaches, therapists, all of the work that we do with humans, but it's just another tool that employees can have at their side to support them, maybe in the middle of the night or in between a Zoom call or in between a meeting, when they're not necessarily able to maybe have that conversation with someone, or they just want that pause that we've been talking about. So that's part of the reason why we're building Libbie in the way that we are doing. And yeah, I think in terms of organizations, seeing the need to create different options. You do a lot of work with employee resource groups to be able to support the employees in their mental well-being, and recognizing that different solutions are going to work for different types of individuals. So again, tapping, breathing, meditation are part of our app, but maybe is it you need dance, or you want yoga, or you want some other form of healing, right? When we're working with organizations, also it is looking at what are the different modalities, how do we take in cultural knowledge, practices. You mentioned earlier something about, oh, maybe based on my either personal situation or economic situation, flex dollars, someone's going to use that for a massage, someone's going to use that for food because that's what they need, right? So it's also about how is it that we can be as flexible as possible with the resources that we offer to employees, so that people don't feel pigeonholed and feeling like, oh, I can only use this in one way.
Yeah, I would echo that, because I think a lot of the successful things that we've done with organizations is to identify ways where, if they do want to lean into the singular like workshop or training experience as their wellness offering, that we show how to, one, build relationships and rapport so that we're not entering to organizations with our own definition about what wellness is and how it's achieved and accomplished, but we have time where we get to do listening sessions and get to meet and meet members of the community so that they get to tell us, what wellness looks like for them. And then again, when people do want to incorporate this singular workshop or session model, we are able to demonstrate to organizations how you can actually incorporate choice and the power to choose inside of these wellness opportunities and moments. So as you hear about how different people experience and pursue healing and well-being, you can really, that's the place where you can be innovative, right? So maybe what you're offering as part of this one-time experience is that people have a chance to go into a different room and get something different, right? They get a menu of things and you get to choose, but also incorporating things where we invite people to practice, like checking in with myself, right? Checking in with yourself. And it's like, what's present and what kind of wellness thing do I need in the moment? Is it to not attend the big organizational wide wellness gathering? Because that might be what wellness is to me. And so again, for leadership tips and strategies, we can be able to come back and to support leaders with thinking about successful practices doesn't mean that everybody is in line doing the same thing. It doesn't, and so supporting not only leaders, but organizations with thinking about how can you create experiences where that variation and the power to choose are possible. And so some of our retreats and workshops are opportunities to demonstrate to organizations how you get to do that. So that's what I love. And then also remember that especially for us, like so much of the foundation of the Center for Black Wellbeing relies on historical research. So we went back and looked at what did our ancestors do to curate, to cultivate healing, even in the context of really difficult situations, and in particular, in the context of enslavement. And so while much of the story of our history often talks about the experience and transference of pain, we were also creating opportunities for wellness in community and sharing those things. And so even if you look up at any moment, many times the answers are within the people, right? That you're trying to do something for, right? And so especially if look at any moment in the past, 3 years, how even when we could not be outside and in certain places doing things that we might have typically done on the outdoors, that we were creating ways to be well together using what was available to us. And so if you're trying to figure out and strategize, just go learn from the people, learn how we organically build wellness spaces, and then maybe create place at your organization for your team members to actually do that. It's like, all right, cool. We know that there's an allocation of funding or time to focus on wellness. And so make that available and invite your members of your team to create like smaller cohorts or groups, or to do things to design what wellness looks like there on their own. So as a leader, you don't have to, again, do it all or figure it out, or just do what you see other people doing commercially. It's like, oh, okay, we're going to call in this group, or we're going to do this kind of, mat work because that's what other folks are doing or at the time. But there are more approaches and strategies available to you to help you build and sustain a culture of wellness at your organization. So
one of our partners is a wellness marketplace, and so that gives that power of choice to their employees to be able to choose, again, like what you're saying, the types of solution that can be best beneficial for them. So that aspect of those wellness dollars or those flex dollars, whatever, FSA, HSA kind of things, there are different ways to partner with, in addition to organizations like ours, but also to partner with other groups that kind of aggregate wellness services that does allow more freedom of choice for the employee in terms of how they would like to spend their wellness dollars, if you.
I know we are easing into the last 5 minutes. Something that's important to me when we create these community experiences is that people really get to walk away with something, right? So if you could identify what is something specific, one that Libbie is offering on the other side of this live event, and in terms of a specific take-home strategy, like it is our hope that those folks who are gathered here are people who might just be gathering because there's love, love for the conversation, love for us as individuals, and that folks are gathered here because there's a desire to be a leader whose walk says something about how they authentically feel about centering well-being as a part of, again, the DNA, the fabric of the organizations that they lead. So what are maybe a few things that you want people to walk away with from this talk today?
I also often say at the end of workshops or programs, it's aiming to focus on one thing, which I know can be challenging in an hour-long event. What's one thing that you might like to start doing? What's one thing that maybe you want to stop doing? And one thing that you want to maybe keep doing in the same way, right? So that's a very broad generalization, but I always want people to feel like that they don't have to change 15 different things. It's the small changes done consistently over time is where you start to see that behavior change. And I know you know that, preaching to the choir, but that's my one thing. And in terms of what we're offering is the opportunity to engage with us, the Libbie app. And I don't know if I said it, but Libbie is actually short for liberation. That's why we named her Libbie. And the app is available, so we're able to work with organizations for pilot employee app subscriptions, as well as wellness programming. And if you want to scan the QR code over me, that has all of our information, and would love to continue and have a deeper conversation about your particular goals.
Awesome. I love. And at the center, I would say two things. So we want to not only just start conversations, but we want to be a part of ongoing solutions to making sure that all of the spaces where Black folks are, that again, those environments have the tools and systems of accountability to support them with activating practices that are in alignment with our right to be well, and that effectively and equitably support us with being on that path to sustaining and doing things that support our well-being. So one thing that we have coming up is that often leaders, like we go through these trainings, we pop into things when we can, but we don't often have an opportunity to come back and have an environment where with our peers as leaders, getting some support and accountability to keep processing, to keep brainstorming. And maybe it's helpful to be connected with leaders of other organizations to do so. So we are creating a pilot group where we get to demo our executive support and support folks with some entry-level organizational wellness strategy, and it's called the Wellbeing Executive Collective. We will invite up to 6 leaders to be a part of our 3-session free experience, where you get to get some of that support and connection with like-minded leaders who are really trying to walk their talk around leadership mental health. And so if you're interested in that opportunity, you can head over to our website, www.centerforblackwellbeing.com. And on our events and opportunities page, you'll see a link to complete an interest form so that we can share more about that opportunity. And lastly, I'm just grateful and excited to know that we are in motion, actively, putting it into the environment, putting it into the atmosphere, that this talk is a declaration, an affirmation of the fact that this world will be populated with organizations who know how to center well-being. And for us, that means doing things, practicing, and not just doing, right, but being in ways that demonstrate a commitment to honoring at all of our right to be mentally well wherever we are. And so I'm excited to be here to spend this time with you, Libbie, Libbie Health, and Colette from Libbie Health to do so. And my walkaway activity for leaders is just sit with yourself, set a timer for 5 minutes, and just evaluate, reflect on what am I currently walking when it comes to wellness in my leadership role? What am I doing right now? So just give yourself a chance to gauge within and just sit with that. Don't make it wrong or anything, but just start with an evaluation of who are you being when it comes to organizational well-being in this moment. So, awesome.
Fantastic. Yes, this has been such an enriching conversation. I love it. I knew it would be when we decided to come together for this program. So I'm excited to have had this conversation with you today. And I'm walking away with insights, which I love, is that even as a co-host and speaker, that I can walk away with some homework. So I'm very excited for that. So thank you for sharing your light and your insights with us today.
Oh, you too, Colette. I'm grateful. I'm grateful, grateful, grateful. So thank you. Thank you for your sharing, and thank you for doing the work, being in service in this way. I see you, I am you, and I have so much love for this mission that we are aligned around. So thank you. Thank you,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.